Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, Risky, Costly, and Ill-Advised, the Enbridge Line 5 Tunnel. I'm Liz Kirkwood, Executive Director of Flow for Love of Water, a Great Lakes Water Law and Policy Center based in Traverse City, Michigan. Today, we are talking about an important new report from the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, also known as IEEFA, which takes a first of its kind deep dive into the economics of Enbridge's Line 5 and its proposed tunnel in the Straits of Mackinac. First, I'd like to share a water and land acknowledgement. For Love of Water is located on lands historically occupied by the Anishinaabe, Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations. Please take a moment to acknowledge and honor the ancestral lands of the Three Fires Confederacy, the sacred lands and waters of all Indigenous peoples, and their continued presence. Today, you are part of an audience that includes journalists, environmental organizations, tribal members, governmental officials, agency staff, economists, scientists, activists, and engaged citizens. No matter what your relationship to our precious Great Lakes and the Line 5 issue is, we're glad that you're here today. We are grateful for your time and interest and delighted to be able to connect with you through this free webinar, which is made possible by the generosity of Flow members and supporters. Now, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Flow's legal director, Carrie Lesueur. Today's webinar is very timely because just yesterday, Carrie was in Lansing presenting oral arguments to the Michigan Court of Appeals. Flow and its allies, ELPC, MyCan, Bay Mills Indian Community, represented by Earth Justice, are asking the court to reverse the Michigan Public Service Commission's December 2023 decision to approve a permit to Enbridge to relocate Line 5 to its proposed tunnel. Over to you, Carrie.
Thanks, Liz. I'm proud to be part of another pipeline fight after cutting my teeth on Keystone XL. Today's panelists are old friends with an extraordinary depth of expertise in energy economics. Their analyses are used at the highest levels to guide investment decisions by major institutional investors. We hope that today's webinar will lead to wiser choices about U.S. and Canadian energy infrastructure. Let me introduce you to our panelists. Suzanne Mattei is the main author of today's report. She is an attorney with over 30 years of experience in public interest law and policy, and I won't read you her entire bio because it would take a very long time, but she is an eminent expert in energy economics and the kinds of projects analyzed in today's webinar. And her wingman in this presentation will be David Schlissel, who has served as an expert witness in, I won't say countless, but a great many energy siting proceedings. He holds a double PhD, I believe, from MIT and Stanford, and is also a Stanford-educated attorney. He is really a go-to man on so many energy economics questions, and it's an honor to have both of them with us today. We'll begin with a presentation on the report's highlights by Suzanne, then follow up with Q&A and opportunities for the audience to present their questions to our panelists, with a few others present from IEEFA as backup on some of the technical details of the report. The floor is yours, Suzanne.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Let's see if that works. Here we go. Thank you, Carrie. I'm very, very happy to be here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the the research that IEEFA has just done on Enbridge and the very old and very troubled Line 5 pipeline. I want to state at the outset, this presentation is for information and educational purposes. We're not giving investment advice or anything of that sort. IEEFA is an international organization. We have analysts in many parts of the globe, and we focus on the energy transition from a global perspective, from a markets perspective, from a financial perspective. We're here to talk today about the Enbridge Line 5 pipeline, which starts at Edmonton in Alberta, cuts across Wisconsin and Michigan, and terminates in Sarnia, Ontario. We looked at this pipeline and identified certain business risks that we thought were important to explain. First, we want to look at Enbridge's debt issue. It has a high ratio of debt to, and you're going to hear this a lot, EBITDA, that's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So you can say that 7 times without breathing, and we'll all get along well. Then we wanted to look at the rising costs of 2 large construction projects on Line 5, and many people here are involved in these 2 issues. We also wanted to look at the future of Line 5 in terms of changes in the energy market. So these are the things that we're going to be talking about today. Enbridge construction plans arise out of 2 big problems. One is the underwater dual pipeline that goes under the Straits of Mackinac and has had problems with an anchor strike, with a ship's cable yanking part of the tunnel out of alignment, and the tunnel would be very deep. It would reach a depth of 370 feet. The second problem is the trespass issue, the fact that they do not any longer have a live easement on the lands of the Bad River Band, of the Lake Superior tribe, of Chippewa Indians, of the Bad River Reservation. And that litigation ended up with a court order to shut down the pipeline that runs across that land. And the deadline for that shutdown is June 16th, 2026, which is right around the corner. We're questioning whether Enbridge should be sinking substantial capital expenditures in Line 5. We think it doesn't really make sense to do it. We took a look at credit rating agencies' perspectives, and we also looked at stock analysts' perspectives. And the reviews are mixed. For example, Moody's looks at Enbridge and sees large size, broad asset base, stable cash flow. And actually, in March of 24, Moody's upgraded the outlook of Enbridge from negative to stable. But at the same time, and actually on the same day, Moody's downgraded the company's senior unsecured rating to Baa2 from Baa1. Getting downgraded is never a good thing. And the ratings vice president and senior credit officer for Moody's expressed concerns about an ongoing weakness in the company's financial profile. And this was focused on the issue of debt. S&P Global, another major credit rating agency, did the same thing in terms of upgrading Enbridge's outlook from negative to stable. They did it in June of 24. But S&P Global cautioned it could take a negative rating action if Enbridge's debt to EBT ratio reaches or exceeds 5-1. And I note that Enbridge's third quarter earnings call in 2024 reported a debt to EBITDA ratio of 4.9x. That is very close. We'll see what happens. They have another report earnings call scheduled for, I believe, February 14th of this year. Seeking Alpha summarized the attitudes of Wall Street analysts looking at Enbridge, and they found, looking at 22 analysts, they found 9 of them recommended a buy and above, 11 saw the stock as a hold, just let it sit, don't buy, don't sell, and 2 recommended a strong sell. One of the analyst companies that branded the stock for Enbridge as a hold said, compared to composite stocks belonging to the industry, Enbridge's balance sheet has more debt exposure. So the debt exposure is a continuing concern. It keeps coming up. And the 2 projects that we looked at are expensive, and they will result in more debt for the company. We believe that the costs will be much higher than announced. In the beginning, for the tunnel pipeline, Enbridge had estimated 2018 that the project cost would be about $500 million. Since then, we've seen a lot of cost creep, and at this point, we believe it's reasonable to presume that by the time this thing is done, which is going to be sometime from now, it will likely cost around $1.5 billion, possibly more. Some of the factors that affect our concern about cost are the fact that the tunnel has to be bored about 8 to 10 stories, 100 feet deeper than originally planned. So it's plunging from 250 feet to 370 feet. And this is because the ground wasn't what they thought it was. They didn't reach solid rock when they expected to, so they have to go deeper. There are concerns about the geotechnical analysis. This was discussed in the hearings, the condition of the rock, the situation for groundwater, water inflow rates that can cause problems during construction. And there's also a concern about whether more safety requirements will need to be added to the project design. And here we see the Federal Department of Transportation's Pipeline Safety Agency raising concern about this because it is a unique design, and pointing out that there would be difficulty or the challenges may include the difficulty of performing routine maintenance deep within the tunnel or recovery efforts if there's a leak or some other incident occurs. And we also have to think about what I like to call the need to expect the unexpected. You can have construction mishaps. Things can go wrong. For example, Enbridge Line 3 construction in Minnesota, in 2021, it was discovered that the work had resulted in 4 breaches, aquifer breaches. And it ended up costing them about $11 million. That added to the cost of the project. We also don't know what's going to happen in the future with construction inflation. We expect that it will continue to rise, but will it do so at the pace that it has been, or could it rise higher? There's a lot of uncertainty about import costs, materials, engineering, etc. So that's an unknown factor right now. This is a pipeline that's going through challenging terrain, and we have seen pipelines that go through challenging terrain and have a lot of public opposition also. The costs can balloon well above predictions. So if you look at the Trans Mountain pipeline in Canada, that jumped from 7.4 billion in 2017 to 34.2 billion in 2024. The government of Canada got so concerned, they actually bought the pipeline in 2018 because they were worried that it wouldn't get finished. And the price continued to go up after that. We see price escalations for the Mountain Valley Pipeline that was a West Virginia project, the Coastal GasLink Pipeline, which is a British Columbia project. And here's a visualization of the cost estimates for the Trans Mountain Pipeline, what happened over time. And the final figure ended up being $34.2 billion. Then we took a look at Enbridge's proposed reroute of Line 5. This is a map that depicts it. You see the roughly 12-mile crossing and the potential 42-mile roughly workaround for this pipeline. This one was projected to cost about $450 million in 2024 dollars. But it's not 2024 anymore. And other agency approval is still required. And the permits that were granted by the state environmental agency are facing opposition. The construction period itself could take 12 to 14 months. This thing has not been put to bed yet. And it's reasonable to presume that the cost will be significantly higher. In our report, we, I would say conservatively estimated that it would cost at least $500 million before it's through, but it could be more. We don't know. And finally, this might not be the end of issues that Enbridge has to deal with. More issues could arise relating to maintaining this 70-year-old pipeline. Enbridge has asserted that the pipe, based on their inspection results, the pipe is like new and in excellent condition. But how true is that when the underwater dual pipeline had the anchor strike in 2018 and the ship's cable snafu in 2020? Also, in the Wisconsin case, the Western District Court of Wisconsin was presented with information about a really disturbing erosion problem that was happening along the Bad River, where the pipeline came at its closest point to the Bad River about 26 to 27 feet. That's where it was in 2023, but in early 2024, there were a series of flooding events in April and May that scoured it out, and it ended up only, the closest point ended up being only 11 feet away from the riverbank. And that's nothing. That's across a very small room. That is really close. So the important lesson there is you can't just look at the pipeline when you're considering safety and future safety. You have to look at the substrate. You have to look at what surrounds the pipeline, what's close to the pipeline, because over a 70-year period, that will change too. So we don't think that Enbridge is going to be done dealing with Line 5 pipeline issues. Now, when you look in the past, you had that terrible Line 6B spill, over 840,000 gallons of crude in 2010. And Enbridge said, oh, we've improved our safety protocols. And they've been very adamant that they've made improvements since then. And they may well have, but problems are still occurring. If you look at what's happened since 2010, the Pipeline Safety Agency reported 53 enforcement actions against Enbridge from January 2013 to February 2023, 1.9 billion in assessed civil penalties. The Line 3 construction that we talked about before with the aquifer breaches, that happened more than a decade after the Line 6B spill. And as many of you are aware, there was just in November 2024 a leaking discharge valve at a Line 6 pumping building that spilled over 69,000 gallons of oil as estimated, and has an estimated cost of over $1 billion. So Enbridge is still having troubles. It's not a perfect system. Then we wanted to look at the future of the pipeline and what are the market risks for this pipeline. And we are seeing indications that there will be future declines in both oil and propane, and probably other NGLs as well. The market demand for oil deliveries are an issue because the tunnel pipeline is not likely to go into operation until at least 2023. And within 20 years of that, the energy market will have changed significantly. Due to economic forces, this substantial change is coming even if governments worldwide just continue doing what they're doing now. Don't add any particularly new aggressive policies to reduce emissions. So here you've got the International Energy Agency looking at oil demand out to 2050. And you see a peak around 2030, but then after that, and this top line is if nobody really changes anything, it goes down. If governments fulfill pledges that they've already made to reduce climate emissions, you're going to see this orange line, which is a substantial dip. If they do more than that, you start approaching a net zero scenario, then you have the green line. Probably what's going to happen is somewhere between the green line and the blue line. We don't know exactly where, but we do see it going down. If you look at Canada oil consumption, here it is peaking around 2019 and then taking a substantial dive because of COVID to 2020. And then it starts climbing back up, but not all the way to where it was before COVID. Things have been changing in the interim, and we are not back at where we were before COVID. Transportation is a major driver, so to speak, of change in oil markets. Roughly 41% of a barrel of oil goes to gasoline for cars and other vehicles for transportation. Another 15% for diesel fuel for transportation. Then you see fuel efficiency in gasoline cars, which has improved and likely will continue to improve. You have blending with ethanol and biofuels, which is chipping away. It's eating away at the corners of the market share of oil in transportation. And then, of course, the mother lode is the competition from electric and hybrid vehicles, which is going to continue to grow. There's an interesting article that came out recently in the Wall Street Journal talking about how China is about at 50-50 in terms of gasoline or internal combustion vehicles versus battery electric or plug-in hybrid vehicles. And they're talking about this starting to pinch oil producers. The United States, Cox Automotive says it'll be reaching about 25% of battery electric and plug-in hybrids in 2025. So this is happening, even though there is a lot of lobbying trying to push one way or the other on this. It's just kind of happening in the market. And here we see U.S. gasoline consumption. Now, we have more people in the United States than we did in 2016. We've got more driving going on, and yet, more drivers, I should say, driving cars. And yet, the consumption of finished motor gasoline has gone down. It's down from 2016. Here is our dip for COVID again, 2020 dip, and just like the other graph, it's climbing back up, but not to the level that it was before. Things are changing, conditions are changing. Canada is planning to move forward. It's looking to increase its sales of zero emission vehicles. Ultimately, it wants to get to 100%. And here's an interesting quote. It's conceivable that in a few years' time, as global economies wean themselves off hydrocarbons, Canadian oil sands and Enbridge's main line may become stranded assets. That's quite a powerful statement and a specific and targeted statement. But what's interesting to me is not so much the statement as who made it. It wasn't made by an environmental advocacy group or a climate advocacy group. It was made by Macro Tips Trading, which is simply advising people about the stock value and the making predictions. February 2024, this is what they said about Enbridge. Now, I want to talk for a moment about propane. Propane is about 60% of the natural gas liquids that are moving through the pipeline. There's about 90,000 capacity of natural gas liquids, 60% propane, and 30% butane, and then the rest is other NGLs. So there's a lot of local dependence on propane right now for home heating as well as crop drying, but particular home heating. And it represents a need that has to be addressed. But it also represents an important health and safety concern because a landmark study in 2023 found propane burners set on high, boiling, cooking, ovens set at 350 degrees, baking, broiling, emitted detectable levels of benzene, a cancer-causing chemical, in some homes at levels above health benchmarks. The benzene emissions migrated in the homes, in some cases raising bedroom benzene concentrations above chronic health benchmarks, a condition that would persist for hours after the stove was turned off. So bedrooms, think about children, infants. Parents are likely to be concerned about this. And the more this kind of information gets out, the more people are going to be looking to find a way to cook without burning inside their home. The U.S. Energy Information Administration does predictions on fuel use, and they do it by region. And that's particularly interesting because I noted in some of the documents in the hearing records that there were a lot of statements about how, well, you know, Michigan and Wisconsin are different and they need the propane and they're going to want to keep using it. But this is the estimate for the East, North, Central United States, which includes both Michigan and Wisconsin. And you see that they've already seen a significant drop in use from 2022 to 2024. And after that, the plummet levels a little bit, but continues going downward. And there it is in 2050. It's a lot lower than it was in 2022. So propane use, we believe, is going to decline as people look at electrification and other options for their homes. Market demand for butane, which is the second most present natural gas liquid in the pipeline, it's mostly used as a gasoline blending component, so its demand will be affected by the gasoline consumption trend. The other natural gas liquids, they can be used to make petrochemicals, but IEEFA has done a lot of research on the market for petrochemicals and has concluded that it's in a secular decline. Demand is not keeping up with supply. There's a glut right now, and also competition from more sustainable alternatives is growing. Again, chewing into that market share. And in addition, global efforts to curb plastics use, especially single-use plastics, are strengthening. There's a lot of horror over the solid waste rafts in the ocean, much of which is from single-use plastics. And there was actually all last year a global treaty negotiation. We don't know if that's going to come to fruition, but it was a very vigorous negotiation. People are expecting it to continue. And whether we end up with a global treaty or not, the mobilization around the discussions is substantial and is likely to have some impacts. Standard & Poor's, in examining a proposed petrochemical plant in Louisiana, as part of its ratings research for the proponent of the plant, warned that going forward with the project could lead to a downgrade of the company's credit rating, and expressed general concern about companies planning such expansions under the conditions that exist today. So, we've talked about the debt of the company, the expenditures for these two projects, and the very tenuous future of Line 5 going forward. So we would argue that Enbridge should reconsider its current business strategy of pursuing costly redesigns for the troubled segments of Line 5. And we would suggest that an expeditious but well-planned closure of Line 5 would relieve debt burden, resolve litigation, and promote a flexible plan to energy transition. So that was the analysis that we did, and I look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. That was enlightening and at some moments disturbing. We have a long list of questions popping up from the audience, and we're open for questions. So please, as the conversation moves forward, feel free, if you're watching and listening, to jump in and contribute your thoughts and questions. We first have a question about the Michigan Court of Appeals proceeding. There was a hearing yesterday that Liz mentioned. There's an appeal before the Michigan Court of Appeals from the Michigan Public Service Commission's approval of Enbridge's proposal to bore this tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac to replace that segment of Line 5. And yesterday, oral arguments were presented by attorneys representing several organizations and tribes who are appealing that PSC permit, and Enbridge presented its defense of the tunnel. And we are now waiting on a decision from that panel. There are several other pending proceedings. Michigan has filed a lawsuit to terminate its easement in the Straits for Line 5, and that proceeding has wound its way up to the federal courts and is back in state court, where Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel, Enbridge, and the amici, including Flo, have completed supplemental briefing for summary judgment. Oral argument before Judge Jamo has been set for January 27th. And there is an additional case pending, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit in Enbridge versus Whitmer. We'll hear oral argument on March 18th on the state's appeal of the trial court's refusal to dismiss Enbridge's federal court efforts to block the state of Michigan from seeking Line 5 shutdown. So there's a great deal going forward, including a Wisconsin case that has gone up to the 7th Circuit. And we keep an eye on Flo's website. We will keep you posted on all the developments in that litigation. A question that might go to our engineer and attorney experts on the call. In your research, what did you conclude about whether Enbridge is currently meeting all its monitoring, compliancing, and licensing conditions to operate Line 5 in the Straits?
I didn't examine that in my report, so perhaps some other smart people on this call can make some comments around that.
Well, and getting into what Enbridge may choose to do with the information that you've presented and the vast amount of evidence that has gone in front of various tribunals and courts. If you had to look into your crystal ball and make either a prediction or a recommendation, what is the likelihood that Enbridge will just abandon the proposed tunnel, abandon rerouting, and simply keep operating the dual pipelines in the Straits for as long as the law will allow?
Well, that's a real danger if they continue to operate the dual pipeline system, because we already know that it's vulnerable. And so I think that the diligence to keep moving that issue is going to be very, very important. They're facing a lot of problems here, multiple problems by advocates who are very well organized and are armed with very compelling facts. Companies don't like to change course. You know, they have a kind of inertia. They get an idea in their head, or they have a direction that they've been following all this time, and they don't want to change course. It takes a lot to get them to do something different than what it is that they really want to do. In this case, we've got government officials pushing them, and we have very effective litigation efforts that are pushing them. So they're in a difficult spot, having not one, two high-profile battles going on at the same time. And the credit rating agencies and the stock analysts, they're all watching. They're all looking at this. They're very aware that this is going on. So I can't make predictions, but I have to say that they are under extraordinary pressure. But it's going to take more pressure to get them to change course, much more pressure and legal effort to get them to change course, I think, because corporations don't like to change.
Right. Yeah, you're shifting the Titanic at the last minute.
Yes.
Let's shift to geology, if possible. We have some questions about the bedrock under the Straits, and it sounded as if there were some additional costs associated with just lack of certainty about what drillers might encounter. Can you say more about what's known or not known about the geology?
Well, I can say a couple of things. I can say that that there were experts in the hearing process who raised concerns about that. I think that was Dr. Kuprowitz was testifying in these proceedings. And who was the other person? Gary Street testified on the issues. He's an engineer, and Brian O'Mara was raising concerns, another engineer. One of the biggest problems with tunneling, especially underwater, is not really knowing what's down there. And you can take some borings, but that's only going to give you a snapshot in the place where the boring is occurring. And trying to predict the path of fractures in rock is a little like trying to predict the path of a staggering drunk. It can go in almost any direction. So it's very, very hard to capture what's really going on down there. We know that they've already realized that they have to go 100 feet deeper than they initially thought they would. What other surprises are in store? Unclear. There's also issues about methane that was raised during the hearing. And of course, Enbridge doesn't think that these are significant issues and has really dismissed them. But that doesn't mean that they're not.
Okay. Let's talk about the Bad River segment and the scenario where where Line 5, where it crosses the Bad River Reservation in Wisconsin, might have to shut down in June 2026. The pipeline is still operational. There has to be a shutdown. How long might that shutdown be? Would there be some kind of reroute, or would that just mean no Line 5 for the duration? What do you see happening?
Well, I don't think there's a reroute unless they build a reroute. And they're going to have challenges with the building of that. At some point you have to look at whether you should be throwing good money after bad. This is a really, really, really old pipeline. Can't emphasize that enough. And many things have changed around it, and many things have changed with the condition of the underwater segment, which we know about because it's possible to get to it. There's other parts of the pipeline. We don't really know what's going on there. We can't see it. So I think they need to walk away. I think they need to develop a plan. If they can use their own pipeline system as much as possible, they should be able to keep a bunch of the business. There were a couple reports that were done that were pretty detailed about options for the pipeline. They looked at the use of Line 78 and some other options. Enbridge has a lot of smart people. They can figure out other ways to keep a bunch of this business. But this is a heap of trouble. They don't need the credit agencies worried about all this litigation. They don't need bad publicity. This is something that they should get out of, and get out of it in a good, responsible way.
Okay. What do you see? What options do you see Enbridge looking at? Are they considering Line 6, for example, to move oil to Sarnia? Do you have thoughts about what looks like a viable alternative?
I did not research that in this report, so I wouldn't go into that. They've got options that have been identified in independent reports. I'm sure they have internal research as well, but I don't know what it is.
Okay. We have a question about the origins of the report. Was your study sponsored by someone other than the Institute?
No, it was, we didn't, nobody paid us to do this study. We did it through our ordinary general support.
And who gets this report? Will it be filed somewhere?
We sent it to Enbridge. That's where we thought that's what we really want to be paying attention to it. And we hope that other people who talk to Enbridge will also be taking a good look at it, because I don't know that anybody has ever really put together the whole picture of the stresses on this system and the financial stresses. And so we're hoping that they'll take a good look at it and realize that they should be charting a different course.
Is anybody saying at this point that Enbridge's long game maybe to transition the tunnel from oil and gas to carbon capture? Is that in the cards?
I haven't heard anything about that. Carbon capture has so many difficulties and issues. I don't think we're going to see that happening I don't think we're going to see that happening in a big way in the next few years. That's for sure.
Let's talk a little about politics. I know this isn't your particular focus. So you've done a financial analysis, but what kind of changes might you anticipate on this particular issue under the new administration?
No idea. No
Okay.
idea. And anybody who thinks they have an idea is probably wrong, deluding themselves. I have no idea what's going to happen with that. But the fundamentals of the market, they're already in place. And even with governmental changes and where they put subsidies and don't put subsidies and things, the fundamentals of the market are already in place, and they're global in nature. So the problems that we've identified are not going to go away.
And we have someone asking about recent moves by the Alberta government to advance purchase barrels of tar sands and Enbridge to expand pipeline capacities with the assumption that the Trump administration will pursue greater use of fossil fuels. Do you see any of these parties arbitraging the political situation? Is that on your radar?
We haven't looked into that, but whatever they do is going to be constrained by the demands of the market. Okay, it's the demand for oil, and that's why those charts that we were showing are so important, because if people are not buying it at the level that they want to make it, they have to not make it. There were efforts to revive the coal industry that didn't work in the past because people didn't want coal anymore.
Okay. So we've got somebody wants to talk numbers about actual demand. So Line5 currently has capacity for and transports close to 450,000 barrels a day. You're suggesting that we're looking at a trend to decreasing demand for oil and propane. Would it be reasonable to conclude that 400,000 barrels a day is a conservative estimate for the capacity needed on Line 5 to meet demand in 2025?
I didn't do that calculation. I wanted to show the trends, but the numbers are going to be different. The energy transition in general has happened faster than people expected. And Dennis, would you like to jump in and talk a little bit about the overall trends in the energy transition and some of the things that were not expected but have happened? Dennis Wamstead is with IEEFA, and he is our expert on energy transition.
I appreciate the introduction, Suzanne, and I would be happy to reinforce your comment that the transition has happened much faster than people had expected 5-10 years ago. I actually just did a presentation internally about the transition in the United States in the electric power sector, and we are moving rapidly away from fossil fuels for electric power generation. And it gets lost sometimes in the noise, but the trends and the market structures are moving that direction. And the collapse in the coal industry has been irrefutable over the past 10 years, and it's gotten even stronger in the past 5. We are now at a point where the coal has become sort of a thing over on the side as opposed to the centerpiece of the electricity generation market in the United States. That is part of what you've been talking about in your report about these market trends sort of hold sway over, the year in and year out political changes or, dynamics, because once you get a transition, say, to electric vehicles, you will need less gasoline. Now, what it will be specifically in 2025 or 2026, I'm not prepared to answer that either, but the direction is clear. And we are moving away from a growth in gasoline demand to a decline. And that needs to be taken into account when somebody like Enbridge is talking about replacing a very old, very expensive pipeline. Are you going to have the market demand to actually recover your investment? And I think Suzanne's conclusion is one I would support, that they will not have the market demand to recover their investment.
If you look at the performance of the oil and gas sector in the market overall, what you see, that if you're familiar with the S&P Global 500 list, they rank sectors on what percent of the economy different industries contribute. In 1980, nearly 30% of the S&P 500 total values was from the oil and gas sector. In 2024, it's an order of magnitude smaller. It didn't go down to 20%. It didn't go down to 10%. Right now, it's at 3.2%. This is extraordinary. It's an extraordinary fall from grace, really, in terms of what our economy is really depending now. And oil and gas is not what it used to be.
Well, I'll drop a quick bio for Dennis Wamstad. He is an experienced utility analyst and consultant who began his career with a long stint as executive director at the Energy Daily, a leading trade publication based in Washington, D.C. He's been a consultant for many utilities and industry organizations. Thank you for being here with us, Dennis. I'm getting a lot of questions about the risk of a spill in the Great Lakes, and I know that's not the kind of expertise we have on the call today. So I'm sorry if I'm jumping over your question. There's a lot of material about those issues on Flow's website, and
there's been a lot of research on that, and right, the Mackinac Straits is it's a difficult water body. You know, the currents, the force of the water. If you have a spill there, it is going to be greater than in a lot of other areas where spills could occur.
We do have a question that this might be beyond the scope of your report, but are you aware of pipelines comparable to Line 5 that have been shut down by their operator, barring a catastrophic rupture? Does that happen?
Pipelines, old pipelines do get retired. You know, the number of the percentage of pipelines that are you know, over 70%, 70 years old, that's gone down over time. So they do get replaced. They often get replaced piece by piece, so that the product keeps flowing, but they have piece by piece replacements. That's done a lot. Mm-hmm. This pipeline has a difficult path, and that's what makes it different. It's got two major challenges to its path.
And are you aware of individual investors or shareholder initiatives that are putting any pressure on Enbridge regarding Line 5? Has that been a factor at all?
I don't know about that. I didn't come across that, but I didn't dig for that either.
Okay, so not a specific focus of your research, but
Right.
not
Right.
something you've seen happening. If Enbridge eventually just gives up on the tunnel project, then what happens? You know, we were in the Court of Appeals yesterday, and they actually, you know, with great indignation that anyone would oppose their tunnel project that is entirely about safety, according to them, suggested that maybe they would just withdraw the tunnel if people kept criticizing it. What happens, practically speaking, if Enbridge withdraws its tunnel proposal?
Well, then first of all, they're dealing with a big risk. If they leave that old tunnel in place, they're dealing with a very big risk of potential liability. And, you know, I think that that's not good from a credit perspective, to leave a really risky situation in place. I don't think it's good for the company to do something that would really not be responsible.
And in the event
That's a very vulnerable, that's a very vulnerable segment. And there's been a lot of research on the extent of spills that could occur and the damages that could occur. There've been some pretty in-depth research on that. So that would be an extraordinarily risky thing for the company to do.
And what do we know about the extent of Enbridge's financial risk in case of a breach? Can they just declare bankruptcy and walk away? How much are they on the hook?
It depends in part on how the accident is defined, you know, to the extent that Enbridge is deemed to be negligent as opposed to just an accident. So, you know, liability can get complex in that way. And, you know, they have a lot of assets, so they can rely on assets to help them through a major liability, but it would hurt them. It would hurt them. This debt to EBITDA ratio it means that they're kind of on a line here. And they really don't want to go over that line. S&P Global has said if you go over that line, we would probably give you a negative rating, or, you know, very likely to give a negative rating if you go over that line. When they do that, when they get lower credit rating, that makes it harder for them to borrow at the kind of interest rates that they would want to borrow. So that affects their whole business model. This debt ratio issue affects their entire business model.
And then what's the landscape look like around this proposed huge tunnel boring project? We're going to enormous depth, but we're also, if I'm picturing it right, we're right next to that huge Mackinac Bridge and that long span. If there's something unexpected that happens in the boring, is the bridge at risk? Has anybody looked at other infrastructure that could be affected?
I didn't examine that in my report. It's certainly a question that someone would want to ask.
Okay. And so
especially given the concerns that were raised about methane seepage into the tunnel.
Okay. Interesting.
That's an issue that really needs to be clarified and resolved. And I don't feel like that issue has been put to bed yet.
And going back to the dual pipelines that are operating right now, you know, let's say Enbridge slides by and the state of Michigan is not allowed to revoke its easement. Does that mean that they're just scot-free and the dual pipelines can operate indefinitely?
If the state loses its case,
the
Attorney General loses the case, there's a good chance that future issues will occur. Anytime anything goes wrong with that pipeline, there's likely to be more legal action. I don't think that that even if all those cases got tossed, I don't think that would be the end of their problems with that pipeline. I think they would be likely to face more. It's old and it's in a very vulnerable location. It's just kind of, laying on the bottom of that strait in some parts of it are just exposed. And, water is a powerful force and it can wear things down. One of the things that they had to admit to was the fact that some of the pipeline safety coating had worn away and they hadn't reported it. They needed to deal with that. So I don't think that their problems will go away. I think this thing is a thorn in their side no matter what.
Okay. So a lot that will continue to be a problem for Enbridge even if they manage to get authorized to continue just operating those dual pipelines. So
and if anything else happens along this pipeline, any place else along this pipeline, given how much visibility this pipeline now has, given the amount of organizing that has occurred around this pipeline, if anything else happens along the pipeline, it's very likely also to become a visible and contentious issue. So,
okay.
Yeah, they don't get to rest easy.
Right.
Not for this pipeline.
I think in Michigan, we're also very aware of the amount of money Enbridge is spending on public relations and lobbying to try to control this issue in the eyes of the public. Was that any part of your analysis? Just the
No, I did not look at Enbridge's lobbying. That's an expenditure that they've definitely been lobbying and raising the issue, but I did not quantify
that. Let's see. Can I ask you a little about messaging? Is that something you'd feel ready to talk about on climate impacts and risk? Can we go into a messaging?
Well, I'm not sure what your question's going to be. I'll tell you if I can answer
and see how we do.
Okay.
So there was a conversation. Our questioner says, sponsored by School of Environment and Sustainability yesterday. Two themes that emerged were risk reduction and finding common ground, based largely in human health concerns, to encourage the general public to support a rapid transition off of fossil fuels, rather than stressing direct environmental damage and global warming. And so the question is, could the panel speak about what kind of messaging has been effective in the space of this kind of legacy fossil fuel infrastructure? What do people need to know?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm a messaging expert, so I don't know that I could answer that very clearly. But I do think the study about the use of propane, and that study also looked at natural gas as well in the home, the health risks of that. I think that's a very important study, and everybody should know about it. It's the kind of thing that, you never underestimate what a parent will do to protect their child. I think that people will care about their children being exposed. So I think that that's an important element that we should always look at.
Oh, we have a question about whether David Schlissel is going to present. David Schlissel has his own fan club. You have to know this. I just wanted to flag that. Everyone wants to hear from David.
David Schlissel was the one who told me I had to go to the Handy-Whitman Index of Public Utility Construction Costs in order to look at inflation rates for the pipeline estimates, because construction inflation is, it's often similar to general consumer inflation, but it can be different. And so he was very helpful in making sure that everything was done as well as we could with the information that we had access to. So he was, and he also just threw up his hands and said, you know what, Nobody knows how much they don't know how much this project is going to cost. We don't know how much this project is going to cost. We just know it's going to cost more.
Okay.
So yeah, that was David.
Well, we're lucky to be supported by such experts. We don't have time for everyone to present, but David's been doing some behind the scenes responses to a few individual questions. We have time for one more question, and maybe this isn't something you're able to speak to directly, but then we're going to have to close. Unfortunately, we have many people who would love to keep talking. Are the petroleum products flowing through Line 5 from Canada to the US subject to import taxes?
It's an interesting question. I don't know.
Okay, we can chase that one down. Good question.
Yeah.
Okay, we're so grateful for all of the participation and enthusiastic discussion. Please be in touch on Flow's social media and our website. We would love to keep this conversation going, and there are many questions that we'll continue to research. So we are going to go back to Flow's Executive Director, Liz Kirkwood, for some final words. Thank you so much, Suzanne, David, Dennis, and the whole crew at IEEFA. So appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Suzanne, and the entire IEEFA team. I also just want to extend my gratitude and thanks for a really fantastic report and conversation. You have really obviously elicited so many other inquiries and in a very important conversation about the future of energy and water security in the Great Lakes region. So thank you. And I also want to just thank everybody who's participating on this call for your insightful and thoughtful questions. It's really remarkable. I'm always just absolutely impressed. So thank you. And again, thank you to Flow members and supporters who make this work possible. We simply could not do this programming without you. And we will be following up in the next week with a link to the recording of the webinar, and we hope you will share it with your contacts and colleagues who are concerned about Line 5. And in a moment, when we end this webinar, you're going to get a link to a brief survey. It is brief, and we just hope that you'll just take a couple minutes and fill it out. It is really extremely helpful for us in feedback and just getting programming that really speaks to your priorities. And of course, we would ask you to consider donating to Flow. Your support helps us to continue legal and advocacy work in the campaign to shut down Line 5 and get the oil out of the Great Lakes. So with that, I want to just say thank you again and appreciate your time here for attending and taking action to protect the Great Lakes. And we hope to see you again soon. Take care.